Thanks so much for both of our speakers. We already have our first question, which has come to us online. We also have microphones in the aisles, and if you have a question or comment, we have about something like 10, 15 minutes for discussion. And remembering that our first speaker is not with us. So the first question online from Jeff Cooper is it really appropriate to compare ethanol to gasoline strictly on a BTU adjusted basis? Refiners don't use ethanol primarily for its BTU content. They use it for its octane value. Alternative octane sources are far more expensive than ethanol. This might be one for you, Howard.
Okay. Well, I think Roger could probably do it easily as well as I could. But yes, I mean, I tried to, although I didn't go through it in detail, there are really three, I think of three sub-markets, but the octane enhancing market, I think, is not the market that would require the kind of volumes of biofuels or volumes of ethanol that are envisioned in the, in some of the mandates and some of the goals that Tim Serchinger laid out. So yes, and I did try to indicate that people were willing to pay a lot for the octane, particularly once MTBE was phased out. But that's a very small part of you meet that octane need with relatively minor amounts of, or modest amounts of ethanol, and that really the market we've been in is that second part, the volume extender market in the United States, and that's simply volumetric replacement. But when you get to where Brazil is, and that's the example, I think, where you start using high volume blends, then yes, people do look at it on a BTU equivalent basis.
I have one question, and then I'll go to the audience. But has all of the increase in use of ethanol in fuel been motivated through mandates, or has some of that been market-driven?
Well, the octane enhancing part has certainly, I think, been market-driven. I guess the question is what drove MTBE out and how legitimate those concerns were, but I have no, that left the market, and there was a real need for octane enhancing.
Thanks for using WebEx. Please visit our website at www.webex.com.
Right now, I think the mandates, until very recently, the mandates have not been binding because the volume enhancement market has been attractive, the second part of the market beyond the octane part. With the tax credits, it was very attractive for people who were looking for the cheapest volumes, and certainly with the tax credits on a volume basis, the ethanol was cheaper. So retailers and distributors were happy to put as much of ethanol into the fuel as they could, which was that 10% blend wall. But I guess I lost track of the question, so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Chris Portier?
I agree. In Brazil, it's clearly BTU driven.
Okay, we've got it. Chris Portier from CDC ATSDR. I found the slide you did looking at the energy content of gasoline versus ethanol very interesting, and when you looked at per billion BTUs. But did that take into account all the externalities involved in producing the two products and thinking about how much energy you're actually getting out of them at the end of the entire process? I've seen some discussions of ethanol that suggest that there's very little net gain in energy from all of the energy that's put into the process to get it. So what is that number? What is the efficiency here for these two products?
Well, there is, of course, debate over what the energy efficiency of making ethanol is. Most estimates hover around about a 30% energy profit. So you get more back than you put in, but it's complicated because you have to assign energy to this huge amount of animal food being used for there. And so how you do that accounting allows different people to get close to. There are certainly analyses that say it takes more energy to make the ethanol than you get back. But as I say, if you search around, you'll find about a dozen estimates. I would say ours hover around a 30% profit, approximately, from corn ethanol.
Can I just add one thing to that? I mean, I think there's a lot of focus on this issue, but, think about electricity. I mean, you take a BTU of coal or BTU of something else, and you make a third of a BTU of electricity. No one gets worked up about that because electricity is a higher quality energy. Try running your computer on a lump of coal. It's very difficult, I can tell you. I've had no success. So the notion that somehow we should be counting BTUs, it's going to sound like contrary to the other, but if you can take lower quality energy and make higher quality energy, the fact that there's more energy used, more coal is used than electricity you get, nobody thinks of that as well, some people might think of that as a big problem. Coal's a big problem maybe for other reasons. But just a thought of counting energy return on energy invested, I know it's very popular, but I mean, I'm an economist and I just tend to think you got to think of different energy as having different value.
I would say that although that's an interesting issue, the issue we're talking about here is how much energy does the farmer use in terms of diesel to drive his tractor, and how much natural gas do you use to do the distillation. So this really is converting currently useful energy into ethanol. So it's not quite the same as converting coal to electricity. Here you had the option of using the diesel to drive the truck rather than making the ethanol and using that to drive the truck. So that's why it's important, I think, that there is a net energy. It's relatively small. As I say, it's about 30%, which means if you wanted to be entirely petroleum-free, you'd have to do 4 gallons for every gallon you exported. And that becomes a huge issue, right? I mean, it makes it an impossibility.
Okay. Carlos Santos.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carlos Santos Burgoa from the Pan American Health Organization. Thank you for the presentations. They were very informative. I have 2 questions. One, is there any information on the actual impact on the cost for consumers of the corn, especially in countries where corn is a major source of food? That would be one of our major concerns. The second question is, you mentioned soil erosion as a potential problem. In the countries where rainforests are being used for that, what other ecosystem impacts have been documented that we should consider?
What about cost?
Yeah, but would you do the other interesting science first?
Well, I would say that the issue of converting any biome to a farming biome was addressed by our first speaker, right? There's a huge energy cost, a huge cost in soil carbon, a huge cost in erosion, all those things. And you can make estimates as how long it will take a payback. And the answer he was showing there, his numbers, I haven't seen the paper yet, but they're obviously hovering in the 50-year domain. So there are very serious costs, but they're equally true here, right? When you tear down a forest and put up a shopping mall, and that's a huge cost environmentally, and it needs to be taken into account. Usually we don't bother to worry about it, right? We should. The costs of farming, farmers are well aware of the issue, and they are certainly converting to no-till farming and other soil conservation techniques. So the problem is recognized, and there are efforts to make it better. It's just important to remember that they're there. These things aren't just totally benign. Oh, let's do this, it'll all be wonderful, sweet, and nice. Well, if we can do this, these are the real costs that come with it. Just like there are real costs, obviously, with moving oil in pipelines. Whatever you pick anything, there are costs and benefits.
So on the cost thing, I already mentioned the good, the bad, and the ugly. And this area of analytical work, there is work, and it falls into those 3 categories, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so you'll find a wide range of calculations in what I'll call the literature. But, I mean, that just because something's in the literature doesn't mean it's good. And I think that there are lots of really questionable things, and I think this is an area where the literature has possibly been affected, if I dare say, by the fact that there are big interests at stake, and it should not be influencing science, but even social science, but I think it does.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name is Kathy Kling. I'm a environmental/agricultural economist from Iowa State. And actually, what I would like to do is ask a couple questions of Tim Searchinger, but he's not online. So I'm going to make a couple comments, and actually they followed closely from the previous comment or question. One of the questions the previous questioner asked is, what is the effect on food prices of less developed countries associated with biofuels? And there has been a lot of study and work on that, done on that, IFPRI, FAPRI, these other sort of world organizations. And contrary to what I think was implied this morning, it isn't clear that all the food price increases can be put on to biofuel mandates. In fact, there's a lot of reasons, and again, there's a literature that explores that. Clearly, biofuels has had some impact, but there's also been some important droughts, and there's been also some very bad policies that foreign governments have undertaken in response to price increases, closing markets, which actually aggravated it. That answer segues into what I wanted to actually comment about, and that's the role of prices. This group, as I understand it, is very interested in environmental health. And one of the things we heard this morning is about the effects of, on prices of biofuels. There's clearly substitution of to some degree of food for fuel, and as you make competition, prices are going to go up. Okay, so is that a good thing or a bad thing for health? If, as was implied this morning, we've had a tripling of food prices around the world and there's lots less calories being taken in by people, that sounds like a really bad public health thing. I think that's not the story, or there's a much, much more complicated story. First of all, food prices have only, corn's gone from $4 in 07 to about $7 now. That cannot translate into a tripling of food prices, so I'm not quite sure where that number comes from, but I'd just to be a little careful about some of those world prices. But secondly, is it good or bad for health? Corn is used in the United States primarily to feed animals. All the corn that you see is not something you eat. It's not sweet corn. And having low corn prices means we eat a lot of meat because it makes meat prices lower. If the price of corn goes up and price of sweeteners go up, that changes the relative prices of meat and corn and sweeteners. That tends to reduce the amount of those products that we eat, and economists have studied and quantified those things. I'll ask the health experts, is that good or bad for our health? It's a very different question if you're looking at food prices internationally. There, people don't have heavy meat diets. There are places in the world where people are definitely starving, and these food prices changes can be very significant. But there you have to ask the question whether we ought to be tinkering with biofuels or anything else, or whether we should simply be giving more food aid and technology and lump sum payments or other kinds of ways to support that. So sorry that was longer than I intended, but I think the role of prices is really central to much of what's being talked about and important to kind of keep in the background.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and move, if this is okay with the panelists, to the last two questioners. We'll try to fit these in before the break.
Hi, Al McCartland, I'm one of the panel members. Howard, you sort of mentioned the blend wall as one of the, obstacles for future growth, particularly in ethanol. As I read some of the literature, I read that ethanol is largely transported by truck and not by pipeline, and I'm wondering if we're going to expand biofuels. Would that also be an obstacle, or? So that's really for both of you guys.
Yeah, most of the ethanol is transported by rail at this point. I think a lot of unit trains, and also by truck. But because of issues with water in pipelines, it's kind of hard to move by pipeline. There's certainly options to do like potentially do biobutanol and other kinds of, there are other biofuel paths. It's just that, but they also have other issues. So then the octane enhancement that you get with ethanol, you might not get with butanol. So yeah, transport matters, and there's this issue again of how many different, we always like to, we know there's no silver bullet, we know, there's only silver buckshot or whatever it is, so we should be doing everything. But in fact, the number of transportation fuel infrastructures we're going to have in this country, I think, is potentially, becomes a constraint in and of itself. If there are 42 different kinds of fuel, that's an exaggeration. So I think there are some real challenges related to those issues, but it's just kind of hard to get into.
Dennis?
Yes, Dennis Devlin with ExxonMobil. Question for Howard. When you did your your prediction of transportation fuels into the future, did you consider the emergence of electric vehicles? And if so, what was the projection on that?
Yeah, I mean, electric vehicles are certainly one of the options. I mean, we don't, we have some electric vehicles in our reference case projections, but not all that much. Mostly PHEVs, plug-in hybrids, so they can run on electricity for 10 to 40 miles. But the full electric vehicle, the Nissan Leaf type of vehicle, again, we do it under current laws and policies, so the tax credits expire. You know, the $7,500 per vehicle that you get for the first bunch. So even with, you know, if you get tremendous battery breakthroughs, costs are really low, you could imagine it, but we don't have electric vehicles. You know, we have electric vehicles, but not playing a giant role. We actually have more natural gas coming into transportation as liquefied natural gas for trucks and some liquefied, probably natural gas in rail and some other places, marine transport. So again, the question becomes the number of alternatives.
Okay, thanks.
Roger, Howard, do you have any last points that you think need to be made?
No, I have no.
Nothing?
I'll pass.
Well, I want to just thank both of you for having been here to help us with this overview this morning. I think that we can see that we've set the stage for a very interesting 2 days. We now have time for a 20-minute break, and so I hope to see you back here at about 10:50. Thank you very much.